If you judge a person by how they dress, you will never see who is holding the keys to your entire world. Ava Williams said that without meaning to say it out loud. But in a place like the Hudson Grill, words had a way of escaping into the air before logic could catch them. She stood behind the polished service counter, tying the black apron around her waist a little tighter than necessary, watching the dining room fill with the soft glow of warm lighting and the quiet arrogance of Friday night reservations. Everything here had a price tag, from the imported marble bar top to the smallest espresso spoon, and Ava had learned over time that people who dined here often believed that price tags extended to human beings as well. That was why her eyes immediately locked onto him. He entered without ceremony. No entourage, no loud confidence, just a man in a simple navy jacket and slightly worn boots, the kind of outfit that made most people assume traveler instead of customer. A backpack hung loosely from one shoulder. The fabric faded like he had been on the road longer than he had been anywhere else. Ava leaned slightly toward her coworker, lowering her voice. "Another backpacker type," she murmured. "Probably just here to split fries and leave a $2 tip." The coworker glanced over and shrugged. "As long as he pays the cover, I don't care." The man chose a table near the back, not the window seats reserved for regular VIP guests. He didn't ask for anything special, didn't look around impressed, didn't even check his phone. Instead, he simply sat down like he had been there before, like the room belonged to him in a way no one else could see yet. Ava approached with her order pad ready, her professional smile already in place, the kind she had perfected over 3 years of serving people who rarely looked her in the eyes. "Good evening. I'll be taking care of you tonight," she said politely. He looked up, and for half a second, something about his gaze made her hesitate, not because it was intimidating, but because it was calm, almost observant, like he was studying the room instead of being part of it. "Just water for now," he said simply, voice steady, unhurried. No accent of wealth, no attempt to impress. Ava nodded slightly, already deciding he was exactly what she thought he was. Another transient customer passing through a restaurant too expensive for his lifestyle. Behind her, the manager passed by and whispered, "Keep an eye on table 12. If he's another one of those budget travelers, don't let him linger after peak hours." Ava gave a small nod, though her attention drifted back to the man. He wasn't doing anything unusual, yet something about his stillness felt out of place in a room built on performance and noise. Around him, businessmen laughed too loudly, couples compared wine selections like negotiations, and servers moved like clockwork under pressure. He simply existed, as if none of it required his participation. Ava tapped her pen lightly against the pad, already preparing to move on, unaware that the man she had casually labeled as just a backpacker had just checked the room's service system on his phone and noted, with quiet precision, every single operational flaw in a restaurant he technically owned. The dining room had shifted into its peak rhythm, the kind of controlled chaos that only fine restaurants could hide behind soft lighting and expensive tableware. Ava Williams moved between tables with practiced efficiency, balancing plates, refilling glasses, and maintaining the careful expression that customers expected from someone in her position. Yet her attention kept drifting back to the man at table 12. He was still alone, still calm, still untouched by the pace around him. While other guests snapped fingers for service or complained about delays, he simply waited, occasionally glancing at the room as if measuring it rather than experiencing it. Ava approached his table again with a water refill, placing the glass down with polite precision. "Everything okay here?" she asked, her tone professional but slightly guarded. He looked up from his phone and nodded once. "It is fine. Thank you." No elaboration, no request, no attempt to engage further. It should have ended there, but something about his tone made it feel less like dismissal and more like completion. As Ava turned away, the restaurant's point-of-sale terminal near the bar emitted a soft alert tone. One of the screens flickered briefly before stabilizing again. The bartender frowned. "That is strange," he muttered. "The system just updated the seating chart on its own." The manager, Daniel Reed, immediately stepped over, irritation tightening his voice. "It cannot update itself. Check the network connection." The bartender shook his head. "Connection is stable." It is like the layout got rearranged from an admin level. Ava overheard the exchange as she passed by, her brow tightening slightly. Technical issues were not unusual in busy service hours, but something about the timing felt unsettling. She glanced again toward table 12. The man had not moved, yet his attention was now fixed on the far wall display showing real-time reservations. His expression did not change, but his eyes tracked information with quiet familiarity. A few minutes later, Daniel approached Ava directly. "Keep that guest under control," he said under his breath. "He is not ordering much, not spending much, and I do not want a table occupying space without contribution." Ava nodded, though something in her chest resisted the assumption. She returned to table 12, her steps slower this time. "Would you like to order something else?" she asked. He considered her for a moment, then spoke gently. "You are busy tonight." It was not a question. Ava blinked slightly, caught off guard. "Yes, Friday evenings are always full." He nodded as if confirming a detail he already knew. "And the system is under pressure when occupancy reaches above 80% capacity." Ava paused. "I am sorry, what did you say?" He did not repeat it directly. Instead, he took a slow sip of water and added, "Your kitchen coordination slows by approximately 12% when table turnover exceeds a certain threshold. It causes delays in appetizer sequencing." Ava felt a faint shift in her posture. It was not the content of what he said that unsettled her, but the specificity. "Are you in restaurant management?" she asked cautiously. A faint pause followed before he answered. "Something like that." Behind them, Daniel's voice rose slightly as he argued with the front desk about reservation conflicts that had suddenly doubled without explanation. A printed ticket spat out of the system printer with incorrect table assignments, causing immediate confusion among staff. Ava glanced between the chaos and the man sitting calmly at table 12. For the first time, she noticed something she had missed earlier. His phone was not being used like a guest browsing casually. It was open to what looked like a live internal dashboard of the restaurant itself, a system interface she had only ever seen managers access. And just as she processed that thought, Daniel's expression changed across the room, shifting from frustration to sudden confusion as he stared at his tablet. "That is impossible," he whispered. "The access level just changed." Ava's gaze slowly returned to the man she had labeled without thought only an hour earlier, and for the first time, she felt the uncomfortable possibility that she had not been serving a backpacker at all. The noise in the restaurant had shifted from controlled efficiency to uneasy confusion, as if the building itself had begun to misinterpret its own instructions. Orders printed in the wrong sequence, table numbers reassigned without warning, and staff members exchanged glances that carried more uncertainty than answers. Ava Williams stood near the service station, gripping her order pad a little tighter than before, her eyes flicking repeatedly toward table 12. The man remained seated exactly as before, calm and unreadable, as if the surrounding disruption belonged to another world entirely. Daniel Reed moved quickly behind the bar, tapping aggressively on the restaurant's main control tablet. His jaw tightened with each passing second. "This is not a simple glitch," he said under his breath. "The entire system hierarchy is being reconfigured." A nearby server leaned in, confused. "Reconfigured by who?" Daniel did not answer immediately. Instead, he swiped through multiple access logs, his expression slowly shifting from irritation to something closer to disbelief. Ava stepped closer without meaning to. "Is it the network?" she asked. Daniel shook his head once. "No. This is administrative override at the highest level. I am being locked out of my own dashboard." The words hung in the air longer than they should have. Ava felt a cold, unfamiliar tension form in her chest. Administrative override was not something that happened accidentally. She turned slightly, her gaze once again drawn to the man at table 12. He was no longer looking at the room. He was looking at his phone, but not in the way a guest normally would. His expression was still calm, but there was a quiet focus in his eyes that now felt different, more deliberate, more informed, as if he was not observing the restaurant anymore, but guiding it from within. A sudden notification tone echoed from Daniel's tablet. He froze. "No," he whispered. "That cannot be correct." Ava stepped closer, her voice cautious. "What is it?" Daniel turned the screen slightly toward her. On it, a message had appeared granting full system access authorization under a name she did not immediately recognize. Ethan Carter. The name lingered in Ava's mind for a second before recognition slowly formed, like a distant memory aligning itself into focus. Carter. The same name as the ownership registry of the restaurant group. She felt her breath slow without permission. Across the dining room, Ethan Carter finally lifted his gaze from his phone. Not toward the staff, not toward the confusion, but toward the central structure of the restaurant itself, as if confirming that everything was now aligned exactly as intended. Daniel stepped away from the bar, moving toward table 12 with visible hesitation. The usual authority in his stride was gone, replaced by uncertainty that he clearly did not want to show in front of his staff. Ava followed instinctively, though she did not fully understand why. When Daniel reached the table, he stopped at a careful distance. "Sir," he said, voice noticeably restrained, "we are experiencing a system authorization shift. May I ask if you are involved in this?" Ethan looked up at him calmly. There was no arrogance in his expression, no urgency, no attempt to assert dominance. Only quiet acknowledgement. "Yes," he said simply. One word. No explanation. No justification. The restaurant seemed to hold still for a fraction of a second after that response. Ava stood a few steps behind Daniel, her mind struggling to connect what she was seeing with what she had assumed earlier. A backpacker, she had thought. A budget traveler passing through a space too expensive for him. Yet now the manager of the entire establishment was addressing him with careful respect, and the system that controlled every reservation, every transaction, every operational decision had just acknowledged his authority above all others. Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair, his voice still even. "You were running this location at maximum efficiency, but not maximum stability," he said. Daniel swallowed, clearly trying to maintain composure. "We were not aware of any scheduled oversight visit." Ethan nodded once. "That is because this was not scheduled." Silence followed. Not loud, not dramatic, but heavy in a way that made the surrounding noise of the restaurant feel distant. Ava felt her earlier certainty begin to collapse into something unfamiliar. She had not simply misjudged a customer. She had misread the entire structure of the world she worked in. And for the first time since she had started her shift that evening, she realized the man at table 12 had never been just a guest at all. The atmosphere inside the restaurant had fully shifted into something no one on staff had experienced before. A quiet instability that made every sound feel slightly delayed, as if reality itself was recalibrating in real time. Ava Williams stood frozen near the edge of the dining floor, her order pad lowered but still clenched in her hand, her eyes fixed on the exchange unfolding at table 12. Ethan Carter remained seated in the same calm posture, but now the space around him felt different. No longer just a guest area, but a point of control that the entire restaurant seemed to orbit without understanding why. Daniel Reed stood directly in front of him, his professional confidence replaced by careful restraint, as though every word he spoke now required approval from something larger than himself. "Sir," Daniel said again, his voice lower than before, "if you are performing an administrative review, it would have been helpful for management to be informed in advance." Ethan's expression did not change. "The purpose of an unannounced review is to observe reality without preparation," he replied calmly. The simplicity of the answer made the tension in the room feel heavier. Ava noticed other staff slowing their movements, sensing the shift without fully understanding it. Conversations between tables softened, plates were delivered more quietly, and even the background music seemed less noticeable. Daniel exhaled slowly, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. "Then may I ask what specific area we should be focusing on?" Ethan paused for a moment, glancing briefly across the dining room. "Consistency," he said. "Your service is visually polished, but operationally fragmented. There is a difference between appearance and structure." Ava felt those words land more deeply than she expected. Appearance and structure. It was not an insult, but it also was not praise. It was observation, precise and unemotional. Daniel followed his gaze, then nodded carefully. We have been operating under high-demand conditions. Some inefficiencies are expected during peak hours. Ethan looked back at him. Expected does not mean acceptable. The response was quiet, but it carried a weight that made Daniel pause. For the first time, Ava noticed something unusual in her manager's expression. He was not arguing anymore. He was listening. Across the room, the restaurant's digital reservation board flickered again, then stabilized with updated seating assignments that now aligned perfectly with real-time occupancy. A technician near the kitchen whispered in confusion. "Those changes are coming from a master override channel," he said. "I do not recognize the source protocol." Ava slowly stepped forward, drawn closer despite herself. She could feel the boundaries of her assumptions dissolving with each passing second. The man she had dismissed earlier was not just influencing the system. He was embedded within it. Daniel turned slightly toward Ava, as if remembering she was there for the first time since the situation escalated. "Ava, return to your section," he said, though his tone lacked its usual authority. But Ethan spoke before she could move. "She can stay." The words were simple, but they shifted attention immediately. Ava looked up, surprised. Ethan's gaze met hers for the first time directly since everything began. There was no judgment in his expression, only awareness. "You were efficient earlier," he said. "But efficiency without understanding leads to misinterpretation." Ava felt a slight tightening in her chest. "I thought you were a traveler," she admitted quietly before she could stop herself. Ethan did not react defensively. Instead, he gave a faint nod, as if acknowledging a data point rather than an accusation. "Most people see what they expect to see," he said. Daniel cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the conversation. "Mr. Carter, if this is a full operational review, I would like to ensure my team is properly briefed on expectations moving forward." Ethan leaned slightly forward in his chair, resting his hands calmly on the table. "There will be no briefing," he said. "Only observation." The simplicity of that statement created a silence that stretched across the nearby tables. Ava noticed guests beginning to sense something unusual, though none of them could identify what it was. Staff were more coordinated but less certain. Systems were more precise but no longer familiar. And at the center of it all, the man she had mislabeled as a backpacker remained completely still, as if he had never needed to prove anything to anyone at all. The silence that followed Ethan Carter's last statement did not feel empty. It felt structured, as if the entire restaurant had unknowingly entered a different operational mode where every movement carried consequence. Ava Williams stood a few steps behind Daniel Reed, her attention locked on the man who had now become the center of gravity for everything happening inside the room. Staff members moved more carefully, not out of fear, but out of awareness that something fundamental about their environment had changed. Even the usual rhythm of clinking plates and overlapping conversations felt subdued, like the building itself was listening. Daniel adjusted his posture, attempting to maintain professionalism despite the invisible pressure of the moment. "Understood," he said carefully. "Then we will continue normal service while your observation remains in effect." Ethan gave a slight nod, not approving or disapproving, simply acknowledging the statement. He reached for his glass of water, taking a slow sip, and for the first time since Ava had noticed him, he looked less like a guest and more like someone reviewing a system from within its own architecture. Ava's thoughts refused to settle. Every assumption she had made earlier now felt misaligned with reality. She had seen a traveler, a budget customer, a man out of place in an expensive environment. Yet every layer that had been revealed since then contradicted the one before it. A quiet notification sound came from Daniel's tablet again, sharper this time. He looked down immediately, and his expression tightened. "That is not possible," he said under his breath. Ava stepped closer without thinking. What happened now? Daniel turned the screen slightly toward her. Multiple service metrics were being adjusted in real time, not randomly, but with precision. Table turnover predictions, staffing efficiency scores, and kitchen preparation timing were being recalibrated across the system. At the bottom of the interface, a single line of authorization remained visible. Carter Group Executive Override. Ava felt her stomach tighten slightly as the meaning settled in. This was not a glitch. It was control. Across the dining room, Ethan lowered his phone and placed it on the table with calm finality. Daniel swallowed, then took a step closer. "Mr. Carter," he said more formally now, "if this level of oversight is active, it will affect every operational layer of the restaurant. We need to ensure alignment with your expectations." Ethan looked up again, his expression still composed. "Alignment is already in progress," he said. The words were simple, but they carried an implication that made Daniel pause again. Ava noticed it too. Nothing here was being corrected after failure. It was being adjusted in real time, as if the system itself was learning how to function properly under his attention. A server nearby quietly whispered to another, "Why does everything feel like it is being measured right now?" Ava heard it but did not respond, because she felt it too. Every action, every delay, every movement now felt like it had weight it did not have an hour ago. Daniel finally exhaled, his voice lowering. "We were not informed of any operational review at this scale." Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair, his gaze briefly scanning the room again. "If you are informed in advance, you observe intention. If you are not informed, you observe reality." The statement settled across the space like a quiet instruction rather than a judgment. Ava looked at him again, this time not with confusion, but with reluctant understanding forming beneath it. He was not disrupting the restaurant. He was revealing it. Daniel nodded slowly, as if accepting a framework he had not been prepared to encounter. "Then what would you like us to focus on during this observation period?" he asked. Ethan paused for a moment before answering. "Nothing specific," he said. "Continue exactly as you would if I were not here." The request should have been simple, but in practice it was impossible. Because now everyone knew he was there. Ava tightened her grip on her order pad again, suddenly aware that the distinction between guest and authority had already dissolved, and that the man she had misjudged was no longer simply watching the restaurant, but quietly defining the truth of everything happening inside it. The restaurant had settled into a strange version of normality that no one truly believed in anymore. Orders were still being taken, plates were still being served, and customers were still dining. Yet everything felt as if it was happening under a silent evaluation that no one could escape. Ava Williams moved through her section with careful precision, but her awareness was no longer focused only on guests or tables. It kept returning to Ethan Carter, who remained seated at the same position, calm and unbothered, as if the entire restaurant existed as a system he was simply verifying rather than participating in. Daniel Reed stood near the service counter, attempting to maintain managerial control, but even his voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. "We will proceed with standard operations," he announced to the staff, though it sounded less like instruction and more like reassurance to himself. Ethan did not respond. He simply observed, his attention shifting occasionally between the dining floor, the kitchen entry, and the digital systems displayed on nearby monitors. Ava noticed something subtle that unsettled her more than anything else so far. Staff members were not making more mistakes, but they were becoming more aware of the possibility of mistakes. Every movement was now slightly delayed by self-correction, as if the presence of observation had introduced a layer of hesitation into instinct. A server dropped a spoon, bent to pick it up, then paused for half a second before continuing, as though unsure whether even small actions were still part of routine or part of evaluation. Daniel finally approached Ethan again, his tone more measured than before. "We are maintaining service standards," he said. "If there are specific metrics you would like emphasized, we can adjust in real time." Ethan looked at him quietly for a moment. "Adjustment is already happening," he replied. "The system responds faster when people stop trying to predict it." Ava felt that sentence land differently than the others. It was not technical. It was behavioral. It suggested that the restaurant was not being judged by outcomes, but by awareness itself. Daniel nodded slowly, though uncertainty remained visible in his expression. Understood, he said. Then we will continue without interference. Ethan gave a slight acknowledgement, then turned his attention briefly toward Ava. She stiffened slightly under the direct gaze, unsure why she was being observed now specifically. You are still assuming roles, he said calmly. Ava blinked. I am sorry? Ethan's voice remained even. Earlier you assumed I was a traveler, then a guest, then a problem. Now you are trying to decide what I am based on authority signals. Ava felt a small tightening in her chest, not from discomfort but from recognition. He was not accusing her. He was describing her process. That is how we are trained, she replied quietly. To classify quickly. Ethan nodded once. Classification is efficient, he said, but it is not always accurate. Before Ava could respond, a sudden shift in the kitchen output screen caught Daniel's attention. He turned sharply. Why are preparation times being reallocated again? He asked. A chef near the pass looked confused. We did not change anything, he said. It updated automatically. Ava stepped closer, her eyes scanning the monitor. The system was now optimizing order flow based on real-time guest movement patterns, reducing congestion between kitchen output and dining delivery points. It was not random. It was precise. Daniel ran a hand over his forehead, clearly trying to process the situation logically. This level of optimization requires executive-level authorization, he said. Ethan finally spoke again without looking up. It is not optimization, he said. It is correction. The word lingered in the air longer than expected. Ava slowly looked across the dining room again. The environment had not become more chaotic. In fact, it had become more efficient. But the awareness that everything was being observed had changed how everyone behaved inside it. No one wanted to be the point of inefficiency. No one wanted to be noticed incorrectly. And at the center of it all, Ethan Carter remained still, not interfering, not correcting manually, simply allowing the system to reveal what it already was. Ava realized then that the restaurant had not changed because he had taken control. It had changed because the possibility of his full attention had forced everything hidden into alignment. The restaurant had reached a strange equilibrium, as if every system, every staff member, and every guest had unconsciously synchronized to an invisible standard that none of them could fully explain. Ava Williams could feel it in the way people moved more carefully, spoke more precisely, and hesitated slightly before making even the smallest decision. It was not fear in the traditional sense. It was awareness, the awareness that nothing here was unobserved anymore. Ethan Carter remained seated, unchanged in posture, but the sense of his presence had evolved from passive observer to structural reference point. Everything in the room now seemed to adjust itself in relation to him. Daniel Reed stood near the central terminal, his earlier confidence reduced to controlled uncertainty. He attempted to regain managerial grounding by addressing the staff once more. We will maintain service continuity, he said, though his voice lacked its previous authority. No further disruptions are expected. The moment he finished speaking, the main system display behind the bar shifted again, not abruptly, but smoothly, like a correction rather than an error. New operational parameters appeared across the screen, adjusting staffing distribution, table flow, and kitchen sequencing in real time. Daniel stepped closer, staring at the data. This is not manual input, he said quietly. This is predictive restructuring. Ava moved closer as well, her eyes scanning the changes. The adjustments were not random optimizations. They were aligned with patterns of guest behavior, timing efficiency, and service load distribution in a way that surpassed their normal software capability. It felt less like a tool being used and more like a system revealing its intended form. Ethan finally stood up from his seat. The movement was unhurried, natural, yet it immediately drew attention across the room without him needing to call for it. Conversations quieted instinctively, not because of instruction, but because presence alone had become enough. He walked slowly toward the central floor area, stopping where he could see both the dining section and the service stations simultaneously. Daniel straightened slightly as Ethan approached, unsure whether to speak first. Ethan looked at him calmly. Your operations are stable, he said, but they were never fully aligned with ownership architecture. Daniel blinked. Ownership architecture? Ethan nodded once. A system is only as effective as the intent behind its design. What you are running here is functional, but fragmented. Ava felt her pulse steady as she listened. The words were not emotional, but they carried undeniable authority because they were accurate in ways she was only beginning to understand. Daniel hesitated before responding. If you are referring to structural oversight, we were not informed of any ownership-level review beyond quarterly reporting. Ethan turned slightly, his gaze moving across the restaurant as if mapping it visually. That is because this is not a review, he said. It is alignment. The distinction changed something in the air. Ava noticed it first in the staff reactions. There was no longer confusion about what was happening, only gradual acceptance that the rules they had always followed were incomplete. A notification appeared again on Daniel's tablet, but this time he did not react immediately. Instead, he simply stared at it, then slowly lowered it. This authorization signature, he said carefully, is registered under Carter Group Executive Tier 1. Ava looked at Ethan again, but this time differently. Not as a guest, not as a traveler, not even as an observer. Ethan turned slightly toward her, as if acknowledging the shift in perception without needing confirmation. You understand now, he said quietly. It was not a question. Ava did not answer immediately, because for the first time, she realized the misjudgment was not just about appearance. It was about scale. She had not mistaken a customer for a traveler. She had mistaken the structure of authority itself. And as Ethan Carter stood at the center of the restaurant, not demanding control but embodying it, Ava understood that nothing in this space had ever been random, only unseen until the moment it chose to reveal itself. The entire restaurant felt as if it had entered a suspended state where every action carried a new level of awareness. Conversations continued, orders were delivered, and glasses were refilled, but nothing felt automatic anymore. Ava Williams moved slowly through her section, her mind no longer focused on tasks alone, but on understanding the reality that had been revealed in front of her. Ethan Carter stood near the center of the dining floor, calm and composed, no longer needing to speak for his presence to be understood. Daniel Reed remained slightly behind him, his posture carefully controlled, as if even breathing too loudly might disrupt the balance of the moment. We will proceed with standard closure procedures for the evening, Daniel said finally, attempting to reestablish familiar structure. Ethan turned his head slightly. You may proceed, he said. It was not permission. It was confirmation that the system still functioned, but now under a different frame of reference. Ava noticed the shift immediately. No one was being dismissed. No one was being corrected in anger. Instead, everything was being observed, evaluated, and allowed to stabilize on its own terms. A quiet notification appeared again on Daniel's tablet, but he did not open it this time. He already understood what it would say. The system was fully synchronized with Carter Group executive oversight. There were no further anomalies, only alignment. Ethan began walking slowly toward the exit of the main dining floor. Not hurried, not performative, just steady, as if the environment had already accepted his departure before it happened. Staff members instinctively moved out of his path without being instructed. Ava found herself doing the same, though she did not fully realize it until he was already a few steps away. As he passed her, he paused slightly, not long enough to interrupt movement, but long enough to be acknowledged. He looked at her directly. You were observant, he said simply. Ava hesitated, then nodded slightly. I was wrong earlier, she admitted quietly. Ethan did not correct her. Instead, he responded with calm certainty. Being wrong is only a problem if you remain unchanged by it. The sentence stayed with her longer than expected. There was no judgment in it, only structure. Daniel stepped forward, speaking carefully. Mr. Carter, should we expect further evaluation visits in the near future? Ethan stopped near the entrance, considering the question briefly. No, he said. What needed to be seen has already been seen. That answer carried finality without closure. Ava felt it immediately. This was not the end of something chaotic. It was the completion of observation. Ethan placed his hand briefly near the exit control panel. The system confirmed his identity silently, and the doors unlocked without sound. Before stepping out, he looked back once across the restaurant. Not at a specific person, but at the space itself. A system is never defined by its design alone, he said. It is defined by how accurately people understand their place within it. Then he left. The doors closed behind him without force, only precision. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The restaurant remained open, still functioning, still serving, but something fundamental had shifted in how everyone experienced it. Daniel finally exhaled, lowering his tablet fully. Ava stood still, her gaze fixed on the entrance Ethan had just walked through. She understood now that nothing about the evening had been accidental. Every moment had been intentional in ways she had not been equipped to recognize at first. And for the first time since the shift began, the restaurant felt normal again, but no one inside it believed they were the same people who had started the night. The moment Ethan Carter left the restaurant, the atmosphere did not return to what it had been before, because there was no longer a before that anyone could comfortably return to. The dining room continued operating, tables were cleared, bills were processed, and staff moved through their remaining duties with practiced discipline. But every action now carried a layer of reflection that had not existed earlier that evening. Ava Williams stood near the service station, her order pad resting loosely in her hand, her thoughts still anchored to the place where Ethan had been standing only minutes before. Daniel Reed remained at the central terminal, reviewing the system logs in silence. The data no longer showed anomalies, only perfect synchronization with executive-level authorization. Yet instead of relief, there was something closer to reconsideration in his expression. Everything has stabilized, one of the kitchen supervisors said cautiously. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes, he replied. It has stabilized under a structure we were not fully aware of. His words were not meant to alarm anyone, but they settled heavily nonetheless. Ava walked slowly toward the entrance Ethan had used, stopping just before the glass doors. Outside, the city continued as normal, cars passing, pedestrians moving, lights reflecting off wet pavement. But the contrast between that ordinary motion and what had just occurred inside felt almost unreal. She replayed the evening in her mind, not as a sequence of events, but as layers of understanding being removed one by one. Backpacker, guest, system observer, executive authority. Each assumption had collapsed into the next without warning. Behind her, Daniel finally closed the system dashboard and exhaled fully for the first time in what felt like hours. We will document tonight as a structural review event, he said quietly. No one argued. No one questioned it. Because no one had a better explanation that made sense anymore. Ava turned slightly, looking back into the restaurant. It looked the same as it always had. The same tables, the same lighting, the same layout. But she no longer saw it the same way. It was no longer just a workplace. It was a system that had been observed from the inside by someone who understood it more completely than anyone had expected. A fellow server approached her hesitantly. Do you think he will come back? Ava paused before answering. I do not think that matters, she said softly. The server frowned slightly. Then what does matter? Ava looked back toward the empty entrance again, then toward the dining room where everything continued with quiet precision. Understanding what you are part of before someone else has to show it to you, she said. The words lingered between them, simple but heavy with meaning. Daniel approached from behind, having overheard. He did not correct her. Instead, he looked around the restaurant once more, as if seeing it through a different layer of awareness. Tomorrow, he said finally, we will operate differently. Ava nodded slightly, though she did not ask how, because she already understood that differently did not mean change in procedure. It meant change in perception. Outside, the city remained unchanged, but inside the restaurant, every person who had been present that night carried something they had not arrived with. Not fear, not admiration, but awareness. And as Ava finally set down her order pad and removed her apron, She realized that the man they had all misjudged had not only revealed the structure of the restaurant, but had also revealed the structure of how easily people mistake appearance for truth.